Greetings, friends. My name is Peter, and this is Retro Unscripted. I welcome you to episode 21, which is the first in a series of videos that I'll be putting up on YouTube this month that will be reflecting on my life as video games would tell it. I'm going to be turning 42 on April 22nd, so that's a lot of ground to cover. Obviously, I can't do that in one video, so I'm going to try and break things down little by little. It won't be as well produced or as educational as RetroWare's Video Game Years series is, but it's fun to be able to share some of my own personal memories with you, and at the same time mark certain things in my life that happened kind of parallel to my maturity through video games. So I was born in 1972. And I guess it's a coincidence, but I don't view it as much, that Pong here was also created and put in arcades or in bars for the first time in 1972. Of course, I didn't play Pong in 1972. I was just a baby. I didn't have my first documented video game experience for another 4 years. It took until 1976 and my parents purchasing a Telstar Pong machine for our little apartment where I had my first taste of Pong and my first taste of victory. That first taste of victory came from beating my dad. I can thank my mom for sharing that information with me. So between Pong being created in 1972 and beating my dad in Pong pretty handily in 1976, the stars seemed aligned that video games and I would have a lifelong relationship, and that's exactly what it's been. For the last 38 years, I have played video games in some way, shape, or form, whether it be in arcades, computers, consoles, handhelds, and even those little tabletop video game machines such as Tron, which I played in 1984. I've always been around video games. They've been such a big part of my life, and to be honest, they've been a big escape for me. Growing up, as it is for a lot of people, for me it wasn't easy. My mom was divorced twice. We were a single parent household for a lot of the time when she wasn't married. I have two younger siblings who I love very much, but I spent a lot of time watching them and helping to take care of them. So I grew up a little bit before I was ready. And video games kind of gave me that exit door where I could leave that maturity behind for a little while and just do something fun, do something that I enjoyed. So that was my escape mechanism. It really wasn't needed in 1976, but as I matured into the early 1980s, 1980, 81, when we made a major move out of Massachusetts and down to Connecticut for the first time, video games in places like the Duckpin Bowling Alley in Norwich, Connecticut, or in a little diner which was just across the street from the Duckpin lanes. That was what provided my escape. I was old enough, even in 3rd and 4th grade, to be able to make trips down to those places because it wasn't that far to walk. And I would take my 4 or my 8 quarters if I was having a particularly good week and go and just hang out down there for a little while. I would watch people play those games. I would watch the attract screens, see what I could learn. And of course, I would play these games and test my own skill to see how well I could play. And that pretty much went on for most of the 1980s and the rest of my childhood. We moved back to Massachusetts in 1982, and from that point on, I would go to pool halls, such as one that we lived right near when we lived back in Holyoke, or I would go to mall arcades, either by myself or with my paternal grandmother, and I would play as many arcade games as I could afford. I used to hang around in arcades on Saturdays and Sundays when my mom would let me, watching people play, occasionally being able to take over for people that had to leave their games if they had to go to work or if they had to leave. I would get to know the arcade attendants, and sometimes I would get an extra token or extra credit here or there, which was a big help to a poor kid like me. I didn't have my first video game specific platform until 1984. in 1984, my paternal grandmother surprised me. It was an Easter Sunday, so that was doubly cool, with a Commodore VIC-20, which had some arcade conversions on it, which I was very grateful for. Being able to play Gorf at home was it was a dream come true, and I got pretty good at it. There was also Omega Race, which I wasn't so great at. I also had home versions of Buck Rogers and the Planet of Zoom, Congo Bongo, which to this day I still don't understand, and Solar Fox, which wasn't too bad, but I haven't played it in a long time. So that's through 1984. VIC-20, arcades. A little bit of Atari 2600 thanks to my maternal grandmother or thanks to friends. And that was my video game life, which was completely separate from my family life or my scholastic life. I was a straight A student in school, always worked hard, had a couple of chances to skip grades, and my mom did the right thing and decided not to do that. Never really the most social kid in school. I was pretty much a loner. But video games were always the constant. They were the thing, the entity that was always there. So having a VIC-20 at home versus having to go to friends' houses or going to arcades made things a little bit easier to deal with. I had the VIC-20 for 2 years, got upgraded to a Commodore 64 in the summer of 1986. It was my 8th grade graduation present. Those of you who have junior high school to high school, between 8th and 9th grade, there's a little bit of a graduation that sometimes goes on. We had that in Holyoke. I was going to a Catholic school at the time, and that move between 8th to 9th grade was a pretty big deal. The Commodore 64 was it was awesome. The VIC-20 was a little bit blocky, felt like an Atari 2600, but with a keyboard, I guess, is the best way to put it. I did have the tape drive for the VIC-20, but the Commodore 64, and once I got the disk drive for that, it was night and day. The graphics were sharper. There were more arcade conversions for it. The programming language was a little bit richer, so I was able to dabble in BASIC just a little bit more. And I really built up quite a collection for it. I bought a lot of the games myself. There were some games that I got from friends through less than ethical means, shall we say, because unfortunately the Commodore 64, you could pirate games pretty easy, and friends of mine would be like, "Here, have this disc," and I didn't know what it was because I really had no idea. It was blank, and I would put it into my 1541, and I believe the right thing was load quotation $, quotation, comma 8, comma 1, or comma 8. I think the $sign was the directory, if I remember right. And then the directory would just have a bunch of arcade games on it. I'm like, okay. So I was able to play games like summer games, winter games, California games, Konami's Ping Pong, which I think I'm one of a very few people who remembers that game at all. Konami's Boot Camp, which was the Army version of Track and Field, which is an awesome game. If you haven't played it, you should. Yar Kung Fu, games like that. I was able to play between buying them and getting some of them on disc. I had a nice little library that was going on. I used to play against my brother, who I love to death. I love him to death to this day. But I was a bad winner. I would beat my brother pretty much consistently at just about anything we played, and I would kind of gloat a little bit, and he would get upset, and I feel bad about that now. Of course, I had situations where I would play a game on a 64 and I would lose, and I had one incident on the 64 where I played a game and I was almost at the end and lost my last life, and I got frustrated, and I pounded on my keyboard, and my spacebar popped up into the air and dropped onto the floor. So for the last year of having my Commodore 64, before I moved on to something else, I had to hit a little contact, which is where the spacebar used to be. It was actually, I remember now, I was actually playing Indoor Sports, which was a Mindscape game, and I was playing ping pong against the computer, and we were engaged in a tiebreaker, and I wound up losing, and I got frustrated. It's one of the few times that I've been frustrated enough where I've broken something. I've only done it 3 times, and that was the first time. So that was the Commodore 64. So between the Commodore computers, the Atari 2600, the few times that I could get access to one, and then, of course, arcades being so instrumental for me during the 1980s, I really started to sharpen my teeth on video games, and they were really a big deal to me. But what would happen from December 25th of 1990 on would be a big change for me. And I'm going to stop here because that's an excellent segue to episode 22. So that's where I'll leave it. December 25th, 1990 is where we'll pick up next time. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Retro Unscripted. I thank you very much for watching. I will see you on episode 22. And until that next time comes, take care, everyone.